Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. Today we're going to review Into the Aether, the new DLC from Vertigo 2. One of the best VR games out there, but does the DLC hold up? Let's talk about Into the Aether. The first thing to know is that this is a pretty short adventure. It should take most people 3 to 5 hours to complete depending on skill level. Into the Aether is a story expansion for Vertigo 2. Now technically there's 3 areas to the game, but most of the game will take place in a maze labyrinth. There's 2 new gadgets that you'll be using that really change up the gameplay. The first one is the Void Grappler, which will have you swinging around the maze labyrinths. So platforming will be one of the challenging parts of this new DLC content. The other new toy is the Void Deflector, and this gadget lets you parry incoming attacks from enemies. So you'll be parrying lasers or sword swings. There's a lot of different attacks you can parry. And this new game mechanic will be a critical part of the game, as you'll need to nail down the timing of enemy attacks. You also have 3 weapons. One is basically a double barrel shotgun. The second weapon is basically a SMG, the Bumblebee. And finally you have a very strong revolver, which you'll have to figure out how to recharge it. Now the good news is that because of all these new toys and weapons, the game does feel different from the base game. Unfortunately, different isn't always better, and in this case it definitely is not better than the base game. As mentioned earlier, you'll be playing most of the game in this gray maze labyrinth, and you'll have to figure out how to progress, and you'll be lost most of the time without much direction. It does not help that the game is kind of buggy as well. I did run into several bugs, including the sound cutting out, being stuck in an infinite loading screen, or my weapon not firing for reasons unknown. But the good news is that I did not run into any game-breaking bugs. There's also very generous checkpoints throughout the map, along with lots of healing stations. And like the main game here, you have full locomotion along with teleportation, smooth and snap turning, basically all the comfort settings or graphical options you'd like. And the only reason I'm bringing it up here is because there is something left over from the main game that I still don't like, and that is that the default option for crouching is pressing down on the right joystick. And if you're on the Meta Quest 3 like me, that means you'll be accidentally crouching many times as you play this game by accident, and it becomes very frustrating over time. Now the good news is that since this is Steam VR, there are community made controller configurations that you can activate, but really you shouldn't have to do that. Another problem with Vertigo 2 Into the Aether is the uneven combat. The combat swings from being too easy to challenging, with very little in between. The Bumblebee in particular is quite useless, as you'll usually have to empty out a full drum in order to take down one enemy, which is a shame because otherwise it's a pretty satisfying weapon to fire. Meanwhile, the double barrel shotgun, while it only has 2 shots, is very powerful and can take down most enemies in 1 or 2 shots. And while it does have a very short range, you'll usually be in that range for most enemy attacks. Most of the game's challenge though is just figuring out what to do or where to go. A lot of the game does end up feeling like a collectathon because you're looking for these 10 rings in this giant maze labyrinth that's pretty dark. And I found the most challenging part of the game to be the grappling portions for your kind. And I want to say there's 3 different boss fights in this game, but really there's just the final boss. That's the real boss fight. The other 2 are more like warm-ups. I did find the final boss fight to be very challenging, and as you might have guessed, you'll have to use the Void Grappler and the Void Deflector, so you'll have to get the timing of attacks down right, as well as platforming with the Void Grappler on point. Now, I personally found the Void Grappler wasn't as forgiving as it probably should, especially when trying to grapple onto objects to swing around, and sometimes your momentum would take you to places that you were not expecting. And lastly, I did not enjoy the epilogue at all. I thought this was the worst part of this DLC. It seemed unnecessary. However, despite all my complaints about this DLC, it is still one of the better values out in VR. For only $10, you're getting a story expansion of one of the most beloved games in VR. This is a proper FPS adventure game, and while it isn't perfect and I had lots to complain about, it's still one of the better VR experiences out there. This DLC is better than most VR games, point blank. And if you're a fan of Vertigo 1 or Vertigo 2, I strongly recommend this DLC for you, but keep in mind all the negatives that I brought to your attention. If I have to rate it, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Not as strong as Vertigo 1 or 2, but still a pretty good DLC. Despite the frustrations with this experience, overall I still had fun and I do recommend it. Anyways, I'm Fast Lawyer. This has been my review of Into the Aether, the DLC of Vertigo 2. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.